Hi, I'm Jeremy from Sparrowhawk3D. In this video, I'm going to give a demonstration of the plugins I'm working on. I've made a scene which will be using almost all of the plugins in their current form, and I'll touch on some of my techniques. I'll be going into more detail in later videos. The arch was modelled starting with a 3D H shape extruded from 100-foot size cubes. That made it easy to get simple UVs onto the model before I started. I mostly used the displacement tool to get the right overall shape and then converted it to get more vertices. I then reapplied subdivision to refine the shape with more and more detail. The rest of the terrain around the arch was also formed in the vertex modeler. I started with a flat plane and used the displacement tool to build up the terrain. Carrara's terrain primitives are great, but not so useful when you have sheer vertical cliffs and overhangs, and also up close where you can see the strata in the rocks. I increased the amount of detail in the mesh closer to the centre of the scene near the arch. The distant terrain further away from the scene was also first modelled as a vertex object. Again, I used the displacement tool so I could control how the contours matched up with the nearby terrain and the riverbed. I then exported the displacement map and used my texture map filter with an actual terrain primitive. That terrain height data is stored externally from the main scene file. I used an erosion filter to do the rest of the work. The Terrain Intersection plugin lets me combine with slope, elevation, and other factors to prevent a surface replicator from placing plants where the nearby terrain and arch intersect. Here, the terrain intersection is multiplied by the slope to keep the plants off the sheer surfaces of the arch. You won't see the results of the terrain intersection in the shader room, only on the replicator distribution. On the nearby terrain, I need to prevent the surface replicator from placing plants where they will be covered by the arch, and also on any areas that are covered by water, as well as factoring in the slope and elevation. The river uses an ocean primitive placed in the centre of the scene where the detail is needed. I've used a formula deformer to get an effective zero-edge filter so it can join up neatly with a larger flat plane as it flows into and away from the centre of the scene. The rest of the river is filled out by that simple plane, but with my zone fall-off shader in the alpha channel. The zone is a cube, the same size and location as the ocean primitive. This cuts a rendering hole in the plane at the same location and size as the ocean primitive, and I can move it around. If we need to get under the river, place a Murky Volume into it. The current version is limited to interaction with only one surface. Once a ray goes through the maximum visibility, it will return the ambient colour of the murk. When a ray comes up from the depths, it gets darker and darker. The colour and darkness of any object in the volume will be determined by its distance from the camera and its depth beneath the surface. Now to add in some clouds with my new volumetric cloud shape. You will find it added to the list of existing shapes in the primitive. CumulusS3D clouds have a lot of parameters, but with the default settings hit shuffle to get some new random forms and adjust the size and count. Up to 9 clouds are placed in the formation. An important tip: because my clouds are more detailed and slower to render, reduce the size of the model room window and turn off the auto update in the 3D preview while adjusting the parameters. My clouds are more complex, so when they render, there will be a delay while Carrara builds the lighting cache. Once I add in some figures, the scene file gets much larger and slower to save, and that cuts into productivity. If I get a crash or power interruption, I could lose a lot of work. The prototype version of Quicksave saves most of the key frame information stored in the sequencer. So in particular, that includes transforms, morphs, and poses. I'll now simulate a crash by closing the scene without saving it. I can then reload the scene and use the quick load command to get back my lost poses. Using the Quicksave plugin, I'm not taking such a risk by saving the scene less often. If a new object is added into the scene or duplicated, you must fully save the scene file. It's quick because it only saves the animation data. Saving a complex scene every 10 minutes could lose you 5 minutes or more in an hour. When working with figure animation or carefully posing every bone for a still, you don't want to lose that and have to do it all over. A file called quicksave.temp is written to your main Carrara installation folder. So, that's an introduction to the plugins I'm working on and trying to improve.